Hi, this is John Conway. Today we're going to be looking at the Bing CV carburetor. These were used on BMW airhead motorcycles. I'm not sure of the exact years, but I think it was probably up to around 1990. And before we begin, here's what we want to make sure you have handy. Make sure you have two of the pictured gaskets. These are cork gaskets, quite robust. I think I'm on set number 2 in 10 years, but you want to make sure you have two of these handy because these are the gaskets used on the float bowl. And if you happen to break this gasket, you could end up with a very, very leaky carburetor. So make sure you have these two gaskets. You want to make sure you have a small container to capture the gasoline that you're going to take out of the float bowl, which you're going to end up using for cleaning the parts you're going to be taking out of the carburetor. Now, we're not going to cover the floats and the adjustments. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to shut off the fuel. Once we have the fuel shut off, then we're going to go down to the bowl, release the bowl, take the gasoline that's in the bowl, and pour it into a container. Now we undo the hose clamps that hold the carburetor to the snorkel, give the carburetor a little jostle back and forth, and it will break free from the snorkel. Once it's broken free, loosen up the fuel line on the carb, turn the carburetor around, push up against the controls. As you can see here, this will free up the cable so you can release the adjusters. Once you have that done, then the cable's pretty free to bring down to the slot so you can release it. Once you have the cables released, then we're going to take off the spring that is for the choke. This also attaches to the top of the carburetor. Here's a picture of the spring. And next what we're going to do is we're going to take off the top of the carburetor. There's two screws, one on either side. I've never had a problem with these screws. I released the two screws, and then inside what we're going to find is a diaphragm, the piston, and a spring. So take the piston out by grabbing the hold of the little chimney inside the spring, and the spring and the chimney come out together. And this is the needle that you would replace if you were going to replace the needle. Here's the four bolts that hold on the diaphragm. They're the bolts you're after when you're changing the diaphragm. Now flip the carburetor over, and what we're going after now, guys, is the hex head bolts we see here. You may have to file down a 10mm wrench to fit into the space between the washer and the top bolt. And we release this piece, and what's going to come out of that chamber are actually four pieces. Be careful because two will fall out easy, but the last one you can see here is held captive by the housing of the carburetor. So take a small piece of plastic and just give a little tap and it will pop right out. And here are the four pieces you end up with out of that chamber. So drop them in your container of gasoline. If you want to change the jet on the bottom of this piece, this is how we do it. Okay, now we're after the two fittings that have the slot screw heads, and here they are taken out. Quite simple to get them out. Just be careful, one has a spring on it, as you can see here. Here's a little code for when you're putting the pieces back, or what the top of the fitting looks like. And if in the event that the fittings should get mixed up, I don't think they will fit in the wrong places. There's one last little fitting hidden in the float bowl, and this, you can see here, is quite tiny. Now drop all the pieces that we've taken out into the container that you have the gasoline from the float bowls. And once we've soaked them for a while, what we're going to do is clean out all the passages and then drop in that little top hat piece, drop that back into the main chamber. Once again, using a piece of plastic or something soft to push it back up into its housing. Here I'm using a screwdriver with just the plastic handle of the screwdriver, as you can see, as it comes through the other side. And basically everything else just goes back the way it came out. Now make sure when you put the diaphragm in that the little tab you see here on the diaphragm matches up with the indent in the housing. And now what we're going to do is we're going to put the top back onto the carburetor. When you do this, make sure that the two bosses you see on the top that screwed the controls into, make sure they're facing the controls on the bottom half. Now here's a little tip for getting the snorkel back on. As you can see here, the snorkel doesn't really want to line up with the flange. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the snorkel and push down the rubber hose on the outside of the snorkel. This will allow us to line the snorkel up with the fitting. Then we tighten up all our fittings, put our hose clamps back on, and everything should be groovy. Now, if you decide you're going to go into the float area, the only thing I can say is be very, very, very careful. There's a tiny spring or clip that's in this area highlighted. It's about almost the width of a hair. And the other thing you have to be very careful of, there's two tempting screws on the throttle plate or on the butterfly, and you don't want to undo those screws unless you've read a manual first, because the ends of those screws are peened over and you'll actually strip out the threads. So that's pretty much it. I would say the whole operation will take you under an hour, and it can make all the difference in the world, the ride of your bike. Well, ride safe, and thanks for watching.